Developed in the middle of the reign of the Galactic Empire, the U-Wing represented a unique type of hyper-capable, rapid troop transport in the inventory of the early Rebel Alliance, the craft being capable of carrying a 10-trooper squad into action with their gear. The craft's hyperdrive allowing the U-Wing to move troops at great distances. A useful asset for a small guerrilla organization lacking much in the way of traditional space superiority vessels. The U-Wing measured in at just under 24 meters long, was 8.5 meters wide, and 3.5 tall. The ship was armed with two chin-mounted laser cannons, and could also mount two repeating blasters in the troop compartment, pintle mountings being provided at each of the two egress doors on the sides of the craft's fuselage. The ship boasted a Class 1 hyperdrive and 2 weeks of consumables, permitting the vessel to make journeys of several hundred light-years at a stretch. The ship had a normal crew of 2, with some ships embarking 2 further gunners, and it could carry 10 troopers and their gear, though the ship's Spartan interior troop compartment meant that journeys of more than just a few hours were extremely uncomfortable for these men. The U-Wing line was developed by Incom Corporation in the years leading up to the Clone Wars. The initial craft featured no S-foils and only 2 engines, being marketed towards militia groups and the Republic Judiciary Forces. The craft was a modest, though not standout, sales success. These initial U-Wings were not used by the GAR during the Clone Wars. Instead, the LAAT gunship would perform many of the same roles as the Incom product, but carrying heavier loads and more troops. The main advantage of these early U-Wings being their reliability and limited amount of maintenance versus the Republic gunship. With the rise of the Galactic Empire and the replacement of most Republic-era equipment, Incom offered several improved models of the U-Wing for sale in various competitions, but always seemed to lose out, instead selling these ships on the ever-shrinking civilian and sector defense force market. Shortly before the Empire nationalized the company due to its suspected sympathies towards the growing Rebel Alliance, and refusal to endorse several imperial policies, Incom began work on an improved U-Wing, hoping that this new gunship, alongside the clean slate X-Wing, would enable the company to finally gain some significant sales. The company was not aiming for sales to the Empire. Incom had apparently realized that companies like Sinar and Kuat were too deeply embedded in the Imperial fleet acquisition process to be unseated easily. But they felt that they could achieve significant sales numbers by selling to sector and planetary security forces, militia and mercenary groups, organizations that had been using Clone Wars surplus for some time and were, in Incom's estimation at least, now looking to replace their inventories with new vehicles. A handful of U-Wings were produced before the Empire nationalized Incom. The majority of these were seized before they could be delivered to their buyers and stored in Imperial surplus warehouses. Less than 1,000 U-Wings would enter service on the common galactic market, the biggest operator of the type being the Taiwanese Oversector Defense Forces, which received 500 examples of the type and would use them for over a decade in frontline roles. The type seeing mostly quiet service lives as the Taiwan largely sat out the Galactic Civil War, content in its neutrality. It would be in Alliance territory, Alliance control, that the U-Wing would gain its greatest fame. Several hundred of the type, seized by the Empire from the Incom factory floor, would enter the hands of early rebel cells, the shipment's manifests being altered to show they had been delivered on time at different warehouses, while in reality they entered rebel hands and arrived on Yavin 4 3 years before the destruction of the first Death Star. The Alliance worked up several squadrons for these ships, emphasizing evasive piloting and close-to-surface maneuvers, for their crews rather than the more aggressive flying programs which typically characterized the training of fighter pilots. U-wings would be used throughout the early stages of the Galactic Civil War to move Alliance strike teams throughout the galaxy, insert commando teams on Imperial installations for raids, move valuable people and cargo, proving to be a versatile and capable unit which gave much good service. Attrition for the type was slow but steady, and lacking spare parts or a new source of U-wings, the strength of the type in the Alliance steadily dwindled. By the build-up to the Battle of Scarif, the Alliance was down to just a few dozen of the type, and many of these would be lost during the battle. None of the fighters would fight during the Battle of Yavin, understandable given their design intention. As the Civil War grew following the destruction of the first Death Star, the Alliance on occasion gained further U-wings, but the type gradually diminished from Alliance forces as the war continued. By the Battle of Endor, few remained, and the increasing size and sophistication of the Alliance Navy made the type's utility and attractiveness even less than it had been. Produced in tiny numbers by a company absorbed by the Empire and largely out of service by the time the Civil War was in full swing, the U-wing nonetheless achieved a surprising amount of fame for its small part in the overthrowing of the Empire, and its smooth handling is well remembered by its pilots. The U-wing is far from forgotten.